What is a sports car? Is it low and light? Sleek and aerodynamic? Purely mechanical? And built solely around the engagement of the driver?
But what if it was none of those things? What if, in the age of the dominant SUV, a sports car could be something else entirely? This is the GLE53 Coupe, and its very existence is something that enthusiasts are going to get all up in arms about. But Mercedes told us some interesting things about this car. They told us that the buyer is someone you might not expect, a motorsport fan, and that they actually expect to sell more AMG versions of this odd-looking SUV than they do of the normal one. Sounds to me like that buyer would once have been looking for a sports car. And seeing as though most would never have been going to the track anyway, does upping the performance ante on an SUV like this help redefine what a performance car is to a mainstream buyer? Before we find out, remember you'll always be able to check out the full written review over on carsguide.com.au, and if you're watching on YouTube, remember to hit those like, subscribe and bell notification icon buttons to stay up to date with all of our latest content.
If it wasn't for the fact that the GLE Coupe is enormous, it otherwise shares many values with a sports car. Its wheelbase is cropped in by 60mm compared to the wagon variant. Its roofline cuts a sleeker profile, and it's powered by a heavily tech-augmented inline-six performance powertrain with all-wheel drive. Mercedes has even given it a more direct steering ratio. There's no easy way to broach the topic of styling on this car, which is always going to be divisive. It's so huge, curvy and distinct that it makes an absolute statement on the road, for better or worse. For what it's worth, I find this new coupe version infinitely more attractive than its bulbous predecessor. And given that car managed to outsell the equally controversial BMW X6 at a ratio of almost 2-to-1, we think the target audience will be enamored by this new car's much more refined look and undeniable curb presence. While its wheelbase might be cropped in compared to the wagon, the coupe is still 7mm wider and 39mm longer overall than its predecessor.
So it's massive, it's a big sight to take in, and I'm sure you've noticed by now it's got a lot of stuff. But how much does that all cost? Well, this is the Launch 53 and it'll be the middle of the range. Below it will be a non-AMG badged base 450, and above it will be the big V8 Stomper 63.
Price-wise, this puts our angry, swoopy, large AMG 53 barge directly against the likes of the Porsche Cayenne S, not yet arrived Audi SQ8, and of course, arch-rival the BMW X6 M50i. You might have noticed that the GLE53 is a tad pricier than all but the Porsche on that list, but standard gear is beyond impressive. Standard items include Benz's multi-beam adaptive LED headlights, massive 21-inch wheels, and AMG styling items. But once you've looked past this car's confronting exterior, its tech-heavy interior is also something to behold. The gratuitous real estate of the dash is taken up by a pair of giant 12.3-inch screens with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as built-in navigation and Hey Mercedes voice control.
These screens are really impressive bits of hardware. They're fast, they're sharp, they're really customizable, but I've got to say, a lot of the menus here are quite intimidating. There's a lot going on. For example, it took me about half an hour just to figure out how to configure the head-up display that's sitting holographically in the windscreen.
There's also true Napa leather upholstery everywhere, none of this Artico stuff, and living up to its luxury nature, there's heated and cooled, fully electrically adjustable seats with memory function for the front two passengers.
The interior here is absolutely palatial as well. It's full of vents and screens and toggles, and there's this really nice AMG wheel. Everything's really customizable in here as well, although as soon as you sit down, you do notice the ridiculously high seating position.
Practicality-wise, Benz tells us there's now a combined 40 litres of cabin storage, and for connectivity, I hope you like USB-C, because there's 3 of those on offer as well as one 12-volt outlet, but there's no USB 2.
Now, Benz tells us for this generation of the GLE Coupe, a lot of the extra length they've put into it goes into this rear seat. And for someone my height at least, you can really tell. I've got a lot of knee room, I've got a lot of headroom, although you can notice this descending C-pillar. And elsewhere, everything is really good. There's really nice seat trim, the comfort levels are great, and you do get 2 adjustable air vents, a storage shelf, and 2 USB-C charging points. One thing you can get as a several $1,000 option is dual zone climate control for the second row, and there is also an option where you can have screens and wireless headsets for the second row too. It's like business class back here.
Finally, and this might come as a surprise given the shape of this thing, but a lot of thought has been poured into the design of the boot. All GLE coupes will get a motorised tailgate, but Benz has also lowered the lip by a fair bit to allow for easier access, and boot space is up by 5 litres from its predecessor. While it's nice that there's a bit of extra room here, it's still not super impressive given the GLE's gigantic footprint, and it's worth keeping in mind the wagon version offers significantly more space. So now that you've got a handle on it inside and out, I bet you're wanting to know what's so AMG about it all. And this might come as a surprise too, but key to this car's performance credentials is the fact that it's a hybrid. Not any hybrid like your Grand's Toyota Prius, this is a hybrid that'll make you rethink the word. Its 48-volt onboard systems essentially make it a sophisticated computer on wheels.
But that doesn't mean there's any less engine. Powering the GLE53 is a 3-litre inline-6 petrol engine with not 1, but 2 turbos. And here's where it gets really cool. One of those turbos is run by an electric motor, not the exhaust, meaning it's always ready to go when you need a burst of acceleration. Also, it has a 9-speed transmission, which is an amazing piece of work all on its own. It has an electric motor built into it as well, which not only helps with low torque application, but it also helps it smooth out gear changes.
And that's not where the powered enhancements stop. This system also supports something called AMG Ride Control Plus, which has powered anti-roll bars which work in conjunction with this car's air suspension to continually adjust the damper tune on the fly.
So before we go any further with that, I know what you're thinking straight away. Can you see anything out of this thing? Well, out the back is the worst story. It really is blocked in at the corners, and that doesn't really help with your blind spots much. But these mirrors have really good sort of a wide angle on them, so you can see into that furthest lane. And up the front, you have an outstandingly commanding view of the road. In fact, the one thing you do notice about sitting in the GLE53 Coupe is I may as well be sitting on the roof of a hatchback from here. I'm so high off the ground. There's nothing sporty about it in that sense. Can you feel all of that fancy technology that's gone into this drivetrain? I'd say absolutely. It's almost magic in the way it smooths out all those normal imperfections that you might get on a drivetrain like this. And that's to do with that motor in the transmission smoothing out those changes and picking up the slack when you're accelerating and all of those things. Now, to be clear, it doesn't have the brutish appeal of a V8. Instead, it swaps that out for that smooth refinement of an inline-6. It sounds really good. I'm sure AMG have put a lot of work into tuning that exhaust note, but it doesn't have that over-the-top appeal that a 63 might. What you do really notice, even though you're this high up, the steering is super direct thanks to that alternate ratio that AMG have given this particular car over the wagon variant. That works in conjunction with the active anti-roll stabilizer bars to really keep everything in check in the corners. And I don't know if you saw how massive those tires are, but everything is just unreal when you throw this thing into a corner. It's just so kept in check. There's so much traction. All that tech really adds up, but at the end of the day, there's no fighting gravity. It doesn't feel like a sports car to drive. It is still super tall, and you feel every bit of how wide it is and how long it is. How about the ride? Well, the ride's smart, but not perfect. It can be really abrupt. You've got these giant wheels, and if you do dip one into a pothole, unavoidably there's going to be a bit of a shudder that comes back through into the cabin. So it's not as good as the air suspension on, say, for example, the GLC wagon, which I found to be fantastic. In here, it's much more performance oriented, even in comfort mode. I suppose there's always got to be a cost to that active roll stabilization and a balance between making it an AMG and making it as comfortable as it can be with air suspension. I really love all the little details in these instruments and how you can alter them all. And again, it's complicated, it's hard to do while you're driving, but once you've got it all set up, there's just so much information that you can get provided to you. It tells you how much electronic boost the car is providing. It can tell you instantaneously and with a really high frame rate, the amount of kilowatt and torque you're using at any given time. And that's really cool. Now, the technology behind the cruise control in this car is particularly cool. It may as well drive itself on the freeway. Mercedes say it's basically capable of a level 2 autonomous cruise, and it will steer itself, although the car tells you to hold onto the steering wheel. It'll change lanes on its own, and it can be quite well tuned when it comes to keeping itself in the lane as well. It's not too swervy or too abrupt about that.
It would be pointless for this thing to be a massive rolling computer without full active safety, and the GLE53 delivers with Autobahn spec auto emergency braking, adaptive cruise control with lane change assist, blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert. There are also 9 airbags, and the GLE range is covered by a 5-star ANCAP safety rating to the strict 2019 standards. Oh, and fuel. You might be surprised. While the GLE does require the top-shelf hydrocarbons, its official combined fuel consumption comes in at less than 10 litres to 100 kilometres. Sure, it stepped over that by a fair bit in our test, but given its sheer size, we're not unimpressed. And finally, a word on ownership. Mercedes has stepped into the world of market-wide competitive warranties with 5 years and unlimited kilometres of coverage, beating most rivals' 3-year promise. The GLE needs to visit the shop once a year or every 25,000 kilometres, and service plans can be pre-packaged at the prices you'll see on your screen.
So there you have it, the Mercedes-AMG GLE53 Coupe. Does all that complicated stuff manage to turn a giant SUV into a sports car? Well, not quite, but this is something different altogether. It's a big, brutish statement and a tech masterclass that happens to be really smooth to drive. I know some of you won't be enamored with the look of it, but at least you've got to appreciate how Mercedes has gone to the nth degree on the details.